Hello, everyone. Teresa Davis here. Today, we are going to talk about one of the biggest hurdles to overcome when you're grieving: how to forgive God. I have found this to be the most sought after answer when someone has been wounded deeply by loss. There's a sense of betrayal. Where was God when I needed him? I struggled deeply with this. However, at this point in my journey, I didn't know that others struggled with this as well. In fact, as a Christian, I had never heard other believers say those words. I was totally unprepared for the anger that I would have toward God. And it wasn't mild anger. Night after night, I had shouting matches with God. He was silent, and that made me even angrier. Where were you when Andrew needed you, God? What happened? Did you just look away for a moment and Andrew's plane fell out of the sky? Was it like, oops, missed that one? How could this happen? Who are you? Those were the conversations that I had with God. I had prayed with my children and for my children their entire life for protection. I never doubted for a moment that they wouldn't be protected. That the day Andrew decided to be a pilot, I never questioned his decision with fear because I trusted God. And now look where we are, God. My son is dead. The struggle was real. I still believed in God, but I was confused. I would shout at him at night and say things like, "You're not who you say you are, and you lied to me." This type of dialogue went on for several weeks. I had decided that God's protection was fake. The Psalms repeatedly speak about God's protection for his people. But where was God's protection for my son? I couldn't read the Bible. I couldn't listen to any kind of music. And my prayers were shouting matches at God. You may be thinking, not behavior becoming for a Christian. Yes, I know, but I didn't care. My wound was deep and throbbed with every beat of my heart, and I wanted answers. My emotions were so confusing, even to myself. I wonder, could this be you today? During the day, I was exhausted from my grief and lack of sleep because I wanted answers so badly. I would open the Bible app and hit play on the book of Job. Surely I could find an answer there. I couldn't read it, but I would listen. Every believer and many non-believers know about Job, the godly man that didn't curse God, as his wife suggested. Maybe you know about his friends. Some friends they were. Each one took a turn telling Job his fate was his fault. Like because his whole family died and he lost everything, it was all on him. But inside those pages, I knew there had to be an answer. Sometimes the whole book would play. No answers heard today. The next 24 hours would be a repeat. I would wake up again to this horrible reality that I was living. I would lay in bed and not open my eyes, just praying that maybe, just maybe, when I opened my eyes, it would have all have been a nightmare and it would be over. Have you ever felt that way? God let me lament my anger toward him. Some would condemn me for speaking of this anger toward God. But the fact remains that God knows the condition of our heart, even when we try to convince ourselves or people otherwise. Why not bear it all? I was broken beyond repair. I was stripped of my life that I once knew. And I was desperate for answers. Finally, God spoke to me. Not in an audible voice, but God doesn't need an audible voice to make his point. I was hung up on the fact that God didn't protect Andrew. And as I mentioned, I had decided that God's protection was fake. And I told him so. One night I had a dream, and he made it very clear to me that his protection was real. For a split second, he let me feel what it would be like if I wasn't covered by his protection. It was terrifying, and I shot up out of the bed, gasping for air. God had finally spoken. His protection was not fake. It was indeed very, very real. So what now? How do I make sense of all of this? His protection is real, but my son is dead? I was sitting in church one Sunday listening to a sermon on forgiveness. As I sat there, tears rolled down my cheeks because the person I needed to forgive was God himself. In my mind, I could not reconcile the facts that I had come to know. God's protection was real, yet he didn't protect my son. What did this mean? The anger had been replaced with pain that radiated into the deepest parts of my being. How did I forgive God? It was a process for me to get to a place where I no longer blamed God for Andrew's death. When I said God took me on a journey, I meant it. I've learned many things since that day. The more I seek, the more he opens my eyes to the mystery of who he really is. The God I knew before Andrew is not the same God I know now. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Job 42:5. In the days ahead, I will take you to the places that he took me. I'll show you what I've learned. I'll share with you how he cradled me inside his inner sanctuary, where he led me to find answers to my questions. In episode 3, I'm going to share with you what turned my journey around from complete despair to being able to face the rest of my life on planet Earth without my son. Visit my website at thegriefmentor.com to get your copy of the Grief Survival Guide. It includes the steps that I took early in my grief journey. Teresa's Grief Worship is a playlist that I created and personally listen to because it helps me wear a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. My story and the devotion I wrote, Finding Hope and Healing in the Midst of Grief, are available at thegriefmentor.com/shop. I'll include the links in the show notes for you. This is your host, Teresa Davis, and that's all for this episode. Until next time, take care.